So when I was about 6 years old, my mom had won a TV from selling Tupperware, or earned a TV maybe. And I remember her getting it out of the box, and I was doing something around her, and I was being reckless, pretty typical for me, and I think I broke the antenna somehow. At least this is how I remember it. And I remember my mom saying, "Okay, well, I guess it's the TV for your room now." And so that became my TV. And around that same time, my mom, as a good Catholic woman, would bring my brother and I to Catholic Mass and to catechism. And I remember the teacher in one of my classes teaching about how we can pray, teaching that we can actually talk to the God who created us. And so I began to pray that day, every single night of my life. And shortly after the TV was broken, I had that TV in my room, I remember seeing a news story pop on in between commercials for my afternoon cartoons. And it was about a young boy who had had a brain tumor successfully removed. It was one of the first cases of a successful brain surgery removing a cancerous tumor from a human brain ever recorded. And so this news story was talking it up. And I remember thinking so fearfully about getting cancer, a brain cancer tumor, that I was terrified. And so I began to pray every single night that God would keep me from getting a brain cancer. And that was the earliest memory I have of encountering God, of having God work and move in my life to draw me to himself. Through my own fear, through my stupidity of breaking an antenna, I began to have a nightly relationship with God where I would talk to him about my day. When my grandfather died a few years later, I started adding to my prayers, "Hey, say hi to Grandpa for me." And those are some of my earliest memories of encountering God and connecting with God in my life. In our scriptures that we read today for this lesson, we saw that Paul was invited to share his story, his testimony as to why he believes in Jesus before a whole crowd of people. He was invited by authorities to do this. Now, of course, he was on trial for his life. He was potentially at threat to be executed as kind of a rabble-rouser in the Roman Empire. But what an incredible opportunity for him to share what he believed with dozens, maybe hundreds of people who didn't know anything about Jesus. And for him to share the story of his life and how Jesus has impacted him was incredibly personal and also incredibly important for other people to hear. We can look at his story and learn a little bit for ourselves about how we view our own stories and then how we share our stories. So I really want to look into his story and how he shares it and figure out how we are to look at our stories and then formulate how we share it with others. And the first thing I think I see here is to really look at how we view our stories. What lens do you use when you look back at your story? Because you can use all kinds of lenses. You could use the lens of your career and what you've done as a profession for your whole life. You could see how little things early in life led you to that, or a failure or a misstep in some place led you to a career that was more fulfilling or that really actually fit your skills better, or a mentor who really helped you figure out what it was you were good at and what you were supposed to do in this world. You can use the lens of a mother or a father, or you can use the lens of as a son or a daughter, or you can use the lens of being a brother or a sister, and all these different things can help you to see different nuances of your story, different aspects of your story. But as I've talked with Christians in 21 years of serving in churches, I have seen too often that when I ask people to tell me about stories where they've seen God move in their life, they simply can't, because they've never looked through that lens before. And I don't blame them. I don't blame any church person who cannot express why they don't believe, or why they believe what they believe, through looking at specific events and how God has worked in their life. Because I blame people like me, pastors who never shared with them and told them how to look back at their stories and see God's movement through their stories. And that very experience is what led me to even creating this whole series, to help people look through their stories, see how God has moved in it, to develop that lens, that God angle lens to see what is going on in their lives through his eyes, and then be able to analyze and be able to tell that story to other people through that lens. The next thing I think we really got to pay attention to from Paul's story is, how do we understand Jesus's work in our lives? Is Jesus for you just simply a get out of hell free card? Is he the go directly to go and do not stop at anything, don't pay any fines or penalties of the monopoly of life? Or is Jesus doing something different, more significant than that, and less selfish, I would say, than that for you? And if you don't understand the work that Jesus is doing in your life, then it's really, really difficult to define the next two things we're going to talk about. So how do you understand Jesus' work in your life? I would suggest that as you do some of the practices for this lesson, and you look back at your story and you recount some of the ways that maybe were unseen to you before about how God has moved in your life, you'll begin to see how Jesus works in your life. And there might be some themes, there might be some things there. Has he made you more patient, more kind? Has he made you more compassionate towards other people? Has he made you more bold, courageous than you would have been? So this is our next point. What is different about your life today because of your relationship with Jesus? If you had lived this exact same life, except for just remove your relationship with Jesus from it altogether, what would be different about you today? I know for me personally, I can't imagine having gone through some of the very difficult, dark times, traumatic times of my life without the promise of Jesus, without knowing that God has done something good in this world and is doing something and accomplishing something good through me, even when I can't see it. And that the promise that at the end of the age, God is working all things for the good of those who love him. And so he's going to make all things good in the end. Without those promises in my life, I'm not really sure I would have made it to today. So what is your life different today because of Jesus than if you hadn't lived a life with Jesus up until today? And the last thing is, what is the hope that is in you? So as you think through all these other things, what is the hope that has been being built up in you in Jesus? Why do you even continue to follow him and believe in him? Peter says this, and this is our theme verse for the entire series: be ready to give a defense for the hope that is in you. Not give a defense that the scriptures are accurate and reliable, not give a defense that God exists absolutely, not give a defense for anything else. The hope that is in you. Now, all those other things are good, and those could be a part of your story, and they might help somebody else's story. But are those the reasons for the hope that is in you? Or is that the hope that is in you? So really begin to think about, what is the hope that God has planted into your heart? What is it that you hope in Jesus that keeps you following him? Because when we begin to understand that hope, it is the time that we begin to understand how we can communicate that hope to other people. And if we don't know what that hope is, then there is no communication of that hope. And then why would somebody else believe because of the story of our life, if there isn't that hope there that gives them something to reach for as well? So through these things, what lens do you use? How do you understand Jesus' work in your life? What is different today about your life since you've lived with Jesus? And what is the hope that is in you? These things I want you to continue to look at.